Our Forests Hide Secrets from 19th Century Events. Author Alexei Artemyev. Subtitles. We revisit these topics repeatedly for a simple reason. It appears everything has already been proven with many indisputable facts. But as time passes, everything quiets down and the scientific trolls go on the attack again as if nothing happened, starting to argue that there was no flood in the 19th century, that no one burned the forests of Siberia, and that this is all just from crazy alternative theorists. Besides, 97% of the population has no idea about what we know now. That's exactly why we'll keep raising these topics until the facts about the 19th century catastrophe become public knowledge. After learning about this theory from Alexei Kungurov, I was personally intrigued because I walk in the forest quite often and quite far, but I haven't noticed anything unusual. And this time, the amazing feeling repeated itself. The more you dig into it, the more new questions arise. I have to reread a lot of sources, from 19th century forestry materials to the modern industry of forest management in the Forest Fund of Russia. That didn't bring any more clarity, in fact quite the opposite, but it did make me certain that something is being hidden here. The first surprising fact that was confirmed is the scale of the block network. A block network, by definition, is a system of forest blocks created on forest fund lands for the purpose of inventorying the forest fund, organizing and managing forestry and forest use. The block network is made up of block clearings. This is a straight strip cleared of trees and shrubs, usually up to 4 meters wide, laid out in the forest to mark the boundaries of forest blocks. During forest management, the block clearing is cut and cleared to a width of 50 centimeters. Its expansion to 4 meters is carried out in subsequent years by forestry workers. We can see what these clearings look like in Udmurtia. The picture was taken from the Google Earth program. The blocks have a rectangular shape. For measurement accuracy, a segment of 5 blocks in width is marked. It measured 5,340 meters, which means that the width of one block is 1,067 meters, or exactly 1 verst. The image is poor, but I often walk these clearings myself. What you see from above, I know well from the ground. Until now, I was sure these forest roads were built by Soviet foresters. But tell me please, why on earth would they need to do that? To mark out a quarter network in versts? Checked. According to the instructions, the quarters are supposed to be marked out at a size of 1 by 2 kilometers. The margin of error at that distance is allowed to be no more than 20 meters, but 20 isn't 340. However, all forest management documents specify that if the quarter network projects already exist, you should simply refer to them. That makes sense. Who wants to redo thousands of kilometers? Today, there are already machines for clearing glades, but we should ignore them, since nearly all forests in European Russia and some beyond the Urals to Tyumen have already been divided. There is a verst-based quarter network. Of course, there are also kilometer-based ones, since in the last century foresters were doing something too, but mostly there are only verst-based ones. For example, in Udmurtia, there are no kilometer-wide glades, and this means that the design and practical layout of the quarter network in most of the forested areas of the European part of Russia were done no later than 1918. It was at this time that the metric system of measurement was adopted for mandatory use in Russia, and the verst was replaced by the kilometer. It turns out that all these mega kilometers of clearings were made with axes and fret saws. If, of course, we understand historical reality correctly, considering that the forested area of the European part of Russia is about 200 million hectares, this is truly a titanic effort. Calculations show that the total length of the clearings is about 3 million kilometers. We write down 7 carry over 8, and that gives us 4 times to the moon and back, or 8 times the distance to the moon. To make it clearer, imagine a single lumberjack armed with a saw and an axe. He would be able to clear, on average, no more than 10 meters of clearing per day. But we must not forget that this work can mostly be done in winter. This means that even 20,000 lumberjacks working every year would take at least 80 years to create our beautiful verst-based quarter network. But there never were and never could have been that many workers involved in forest management. According to articles from the 19th century, it is clear that there were always very few forestry specialists. Even if we imagine that peasants from nearby villages were gathered for free labor, it's still unclear who organized this in the sparsely populated parts of Perm, Kirov, and Vologda regions. After analyzing the facts, it's different now. It's surprising the grid network is tilted about 10 degrees and oriented toward the magnetic North Pole, not the geographic one. The layout was done using a compass, not a global positioning system navigator, which at that time should have been located about 1,000 kilometers toward Kamchatka. It's not surprising that, based on official scientific data, the magnetic pole hasn't been there from the 17th century to today. It's not even frightening anymore that today the compass needle points in roughly the same direction as the block network was laid out before 1918. Still, none of this can be real, all logic falls apart, but it exists. And to finally break the consciousness still clinging to reality, let me add that all this also needs maintenance. Regulations require a full inspection every 20 years if it occurs. And during this interval, the forest user is supposed to monitor the clearings. If anyone monitored them during Soviet times, it's unlikely anyone has in the last 20 years. The clearings aren't overgrown, there are windfalls, but no trees block the road. In 20 years, a pine seed that happens to fall, among billions scattered yearly, can grow up to 8 meters tall. Clearings aren't just overgrown, you also won't see stumps from regular clearing. This is even more impressive when compared to power lines, which special crews regularly clear of overgrown bushes and trees. This is what typical clearings look like in our forests. There is grass. Sometimes there are bushes, but there are no trees. There are also no signs of regular maintenance. The second major mystery is how old our forest, or its trees, are. Alright, let's go step by step. First, let's figure out how long a tree lives. Here is the relevant table. Plum lives up to 60 years, alder 70, aspen, rowan and thuja 100, birch and elm, 150 fir, ash, apple and pear, 200 elm, 300 spruce and pine, 400, 600 linden, 400 beech, spruce and larch, 500 juniper and pine, 800 and 1000 yew, 1000 to 3000 and pedunculate oak up to 500 years. Sometimes different sources report slightly varying, but similar numbers. Pine and spruce should normally live up to 300-400 years. You only start to realize how absurd it all is when you compare the diameter of such a tree with what we see in our forests. A 300-year-old spruce should have a trunk about 2 meters in diameter. It's like something out of a fairy tale. The question arises, where are all these giants? I've never seen any in the forest that are 80 centimeters thick, no matter how much I walk. Some rare specimens exist, like 2 pine trees in Udmurtia with 1.2 meter diameters, but even they are no older than 200 years. So how does the forest live at all? Why do trees grow or die in it? It turns out there's a concept called a natural forest. It's a forest that lives its own life. It hasn't been logged. It has a distinctive feature. Low canopy closure, from 10 to 40%. Some trees grew old and tall, while others fell due to fungus or died after losing the competition for water, soil and light. As a result, large gaps form in the forest canopy. A lot of light starts to get in there, which is very important in the forest's struggle for survival. And young trees start to grow actively. That's why a natural forest consists of different generations, and the density of the canopy is the main indicator. And if the forest has been clear-cut, then new trees grow up at the same time for a long period. The canopy density is high, more than 40%. A few centuries will pass, and if the forest is left untouched, the struggle for sunlight will do its job, and it will become natural again. Do you want to know how much natural forest there is in our country that hasn't been affected by anything? Here is a map of Russia's forests. The bright colors indicate forests with a high canopy density, which means these are not natural forests, and most of them are like that. The whole European area is shown in deep blue. As indicated in the table, these are small-leaved and mixed forests. Forests dominated by birch, aspen, grey alder, often with a mix of coniferous trees or separate areas of coniferous forests. Most are production forests that replaced the original forests due to logging, clearing and fires. We don't need to focus on the mountains and tundra zone, since the rarity of crowns there may be caused by other reasons. But the plains and central zone are covered by young forest. So how young is it? See for yourself, it's rare to find a tree in the forest over 150 years old. Even a standard drill for determining a tree's age is 36 cm long and is designed for trees up to 130 years old. How does forest science explain this? And here's what they came up with. Forest fires are quite a common phenomenon for most of the taiga zone in European Russia. Moreover, forest fires in the taiga are so common that some researchers consider the taiga to be a collection of burn sites of different ages, or more precisely, a collection of forests that have formed on these burn sites. Many researchers believe that forest fires are, if not the only, then at least the main natural mechanism for renewing forests and replacing old generations of trees with young ones. This is known as the dynamics of random disturbances. That's the main point. The forest burned nearly everywhere, and experts say this is why our forests are so young. Not fungus, beetles or hurricanes, our taiga grows on burned areas, and after a fire, what's left is like after clear cutting. That's why tree crowns are dense almost everywhere in the forest zone. Of course, there are exceptions. There are still untouched forests in Priangarie, on Valam, and likely elsewhere in our vast homeland, where the trees are impressively large on average. And although they are just small islands in the boundless sea of taiga, their very existence proves that the forest can and should be like that. Why are forest fires considered ordinary when they've burned all 700 million hectares of forest in the past 150-200 years? Scientists say this occurred in a checkerboard pattern, alternating in sequence over time. First, we must grasp the scale of these events in space and time. The fact that the main age of old trees in the majority of forests is at least 100 years indicates that the large-scale fires that rejuvenated our forests occurred within a period of no more than 100 years. It only occurred from the 1st to 19th centuries. To do this, it would have been necessary to burn 7 million hectares of forest every year. Even as a result of the large-scale forest fires in the summer of 2010, which all experts called catastrophic in terms of scale, only 2 million hectares burned. So it turns out there's nothing all that unusual about this. The last justification for such a scorched past of our forests could be the tradition of slash-and-burn agriculture. But then, how can we explain the state of the forest in places where agriculture was not traditionally developed, particularly in the Perm region? Moreover, this method of agriculture involves the labor-intensive cultivation of limited areas of forest, and not the uncontrolled burning of large tracts during hot summer weather, especially with a breeze. Having considered all possible options, we can confidently say that the scientific concept of random disturbance dynamics is not supported by real-life evidence. And it is a myth intended to mask the inadequate condition of Russia's current forests. And as a result, also the events that led to this. So we have to admit that our forests either burned intensely, beyond any norm, or were constantly burning throughout the 19th century, which in itself cannot be explained and is not recorded anywhere, or they burned down all at once as a result of some incident, which the scientific community fiercely denies, having no arguments except that nothing like this is recorded in official history. Additionally, the old natural forests clearly had exceptionally large trees. We've already mentioned the taiga's protected areas. It's worth giving an example regarding deciduous forests as well. In the Nizhny Novgorod region and in Chuvashia, the climate is very favorable for deciduous tree species. There is a huge number of oaks growing there. But again, you won't find old specimens. The same 150 years, but nothing older. Older single specimens are very rare and can be counted on one hand. At the beginning of the article, there's a photo of the largest oak in Belarus. It grows in Beloverskaya Pushcha, its diameter is about 2 meters and its age is estimated at 800 years. Which of course is relative. Maybe it survived fires. Such things happen. The largest oak in Russia is considered to be the one growing in the Lipetsk region. According to rough estimates, it is only 430 years old. Bog oak is a special type mainly extracted from riverbeds. My relatives from Chuvashia told me that they used to pull out huge specimens from the riverbed up to 1.5 meters in diameter, and there were many of them. This speaks to the composition of the former oak forest, the remains of which lie at the bottom, so nothing prevents today's oaks from growing to such sizes as well. Could it be that in the past the dynamics of random disturbances like thunderstorms and lightning worked differently? No, everything must have been the same. So it turns out that the current forest is simply immature. Let's sum up what we got as a result of this research. There are a lot of contradictions between the reality we see with our own eyes and the official interpretation of the relatively recent past. There is a developed grid of blocks over a vast area which was designed in versts and was laid out no later than 1918. The clearings are so long that creating them by hand would have taken 20,000 lumberjacks 80 years. Clearings are rarely maintained, yet they don't become overgrown. If a tree grows there, it just breaks and falls. On the other hand, according to historians and surviving articles on forestry, there was never any funding, comparable scale, or the required number of forestry specialists either then or now. There was also no way to recruit such a number of free laborers, and there was no mechanization capable of making this work easier. We must now choose. Are our eyes deceiving us, or was the 19th century unlike what historians say? In particular, there was mechanization comparable to the tasks described. There could also have been less labor-intensive, more efficient technologies for clearing and maintaining glades, which have been lost today. A distant analog of herbicides. It's probably foolish to claim that Russia lost nothing after 1917. Perhaps the clearings weren't cut, but trees were planted in blocks where fire had destroyed spaces. That's not as absurd as what science shows us. Or maybe it was a bit of the first, the second, and the third. Next point. Our forests are much younger than the natural lifespan of the trees themselves. This is confirmed by the official map of Russia's forests as well as by our own eyes and common sense. The forest is about 150 years old, though pine and spruce can live 400 years and grow 2 meters thick. This shows that some forest areas have trees of similar ages. According to experts, all our forests stand on burnt areas. According to them, it is fires that prevent trees from reaching their natural age. Experts don't consider the possibility of vast forest areas being destroyed at the same time. I believe that such an event could not have gone unnoticed. To explain this wasteland, official science proposed the theory of random disturbance dynamics. This theory views forest fires that burn up to 7 million hectares annually on an unclear schedule as normal, although in 2010 even 2 million hectares of forest destroyed as a result of intentional arson were called a real catastrophe. We have to choose, either our eyes are deceiving us again, or some grand events of the 19th century were brazenly rejected in the official version of our past. Neither Great Tartary nor the Great Northern Route made it in there, not even Atlantis with the fallen moon could fit. It's easier to imagine or even hide the destruction of 400 million hectares of forest than the endless 100-year fire suggested by science. What is the century-old sorrow of Belovezhskaya Pushcha? Isn't it about the Earth's deep wounds now hidden by young forest, wounds from massive fires that don't just happen naturally?